Jim, thanks very much for joining me today for the ULI Next Visionary Leadership Series. You've been in the industry for 43 years, and this is an amazing opportunity to share with our young leaders about your experience and everything you've learned in the industry. So give us a little background on what attracted you to the industry, and then you founded Bristol Group in 1980, and what was the catalyst for creating the company?
What happened was, as a young person, I'm fourth generation real estate, and my sister and myself never wanted to go into real estate. And when I went to school, I really became engaged with finance and investments, and I thought I was going to be focused, and that was go into corporate finance. Then what happened, to speed the story up, I worked for my father for a summer, and I recognized that I could be dealing with cash management accounts at $10 million in 10 years, whereas in that summer I was working on $20 and $50 million deals, and I could see that there was a tremendous opportunity in the real estate industry, but it was going to be very different from my father's era in real estate.
Great. And so through your earlier experiences, what was really, you and I have talked, and there was a lot of change, I think, going on in the real estate business. And so what was the catalyst for ultimately starting Bristol Group?
I'd worked for Bank of America Investment Real Estate, working with foreign investors in the early pension fund entry. In July of 1979, the Department of Labor made real estate a legitimate asset class. And to give a perspective, REEF went from having $75 million in total assets to raising $150 million in less than 8 to 10 weeks. And it was going to be a tectonic shift with the movement of pension funds. I saw that shift, and I went to literally the CEO of Bank of America at the time and proposed that we pursue a separate account strategy with our current relationships. At that particular time, Citicorp had over 1,000 ATMs in New York City, and Bank of America didn't have one ATM in California. So the CEO said, "This is an incredible business plan, Jim, but in the scheme of where the core interests of the bank are, we need to put every dollar into ATMs." And within 6 months, I left B of A and pursued the business strategy that I had outlined to B of A.
Yeah, so I think there's many ULI members in various stages of their career, but thinking about pursuing their own business, what were the greatest challenges in starting Bristol Group?
One was being 28 years old and having a baby face, so it was pretty difficult when you're going in and asking people for $50 or $100 million, and commanding not necessarily their respect, but their belief that you could implement and execute the plan, especially when you're in an emerging asset class. I'd say number two, what I would do differently is, in hindsight, in Silicon Valley, they talk about being on the bleeding edge versus the cutting edge. And the mistake that I made was I was on the bleeding edge versus the cutting edge.
Right.
So another lesson learned is it's really important to have multiple income streams while you're scaling your company. And another mistake that I made was I was so focused on investing money that when Greta Marshall, who is the director of the John Deere Pension Fund, offered us some workouts as a consultant, I turned them down from an ego viewpoint because I said, well, I'm not a consultant. I'm not going to do that. Right. In hindsight, it was a major mistake. When she became the CIO of CalPERS and she called again with 2 other people, I didn't make the second mistake. I took it on. So how we then evolved as a company was we became one of the 3 largest turnaround firms for pension funds in the United States. Right. So we would go finish half-built projects, we would take busted land development projects, and in addition, what it allowed us to do was to build equity, because they wouldn't pay us a sufficient fee because the values had dropped so dramatically on the properties, and a workout takes 3 to 5 times the effort, that after doing 2 workouts, I said, this isn't gonna work. And we started getting 20, 25% over what the appraised value was when we started on the assignment. And that, in hindsight, ended up to be really fortuitous in terms of allowing us to scale through the years.
Right. Now, in building some of those relationships on doing either workouts or separate accounts, Bristol today has investment funds. How did that evolution take place?
So separate accounts were really wonderful for 28 years. Mm-hmm. And originally when separate accounts were brought out, they were yield enhancers to the commingled funds, whether they were open or closed. Mm-hmm. So you were absolute return player. What transpired through time is separate accounts became a portfolio balancing tool. So we had to make a firm decision. Do we change our funding mechanism, or do we change our culture and values? Right. And I believed, and my partner believed, it was easier for us to change our funding mechanism than it was to change the culture and values of the firm. Right.
And I think culture and values, whenever you talk to anybody, I think that's had a successful firm, especially in creating a firm, there's always that foundational element. So talk about sort of how you developed the core values of the firm. They're very prominent in your literature and in your website, and how they've really guided the firm over the years.
So if you're going to be a small, nimble group, you have to be really diligent and disciplined how you manage your human capital. And right. What I always try to share with younger people or people starting out in business, everybody thinks it's all about managing the financial balance sheet. And this has even been reinforced through the years, managing that human capital balance sheet is the most critical component, and it needs to be reevaluated constantly. So what happened is for us to deploy our resources, you really need, and I found to be very helpful, is the 80-20 rule. Who are the 20% of the people who are really going to make a difference? What are the 20% of the market that's going to make a difference? Right. What's the worst 20 or 30% of the space on the property? What's the best 20 and 30%? And you really can't make a huge difference generally in the middle. Your outperformance or underperformance comes from those 20, 30%, and then figuring out how to leverage your outside resources. So today we probably have about $2 billion in assets, and we've probably got a development pipeline that's a couple million feet. Well, how do we manage that? We really leverage outside resources. Mm-hmm. My heroes when I started the firm were Kleiner Perkins and Caulfield, which was in venture capital, and KK&R, which was emerging in the private equity space. And what both of those firms did is they had small teams that were focused on particular spaces, and they did everything in those spaces. So in our firm, we don't have people who just do acquisitions. We don't have people who just do research. We don't have people that just do dispositions. So when you control the space, you're responsible for everything in that space. And there are complementary resources, or we bring outside, but we try to do a merger between primary research and secondary research, and then use that research to then target our human capital and our financial capital. And the leveraging of that human capital is much more important to our firm than it is leveraging the financial capital.
That's great. So a quote that I read you made, I think it was you were speaking, you said, "People with passion and dreams can change the world. We can make this world a better place. We can improve the human conditions." So I think at times our industry struggles a little bit with the idea that doing the right thing and making money are sort of mutually exclusive ideas. So talk about how that quote sort of applies to your business and to your everyday personal life.
So one of the great lessons through my association with the Urban Land Institute is the generations before me really instilled in me is that you can do well and do good.
Right.
And the second thing was, which didn't make sense when I was younger, but looking back is the multiplier has been unbelievable, is the more you give, the more you get. And at first, the more you get doesn't sound right, but it just allows you to, really expand on a multidimensional basis. Yeah. And if you look at a lot of the great thinkers through time, you go back to, Medici, the Medicis and that. Leonardo da Vinci was an artist, he was an engineer, he was an architect. Right. So I find if you have a multitude of interests, it really expands in a number of your mind and your imagination in a number of different ways. How do you make it systemic? To me, when you're going for all these awards or these certifications, to me, it's like getting a Weeblo badge, going through the Boy Scouts or something. And I'm not trying to diss on the Boy Scouts, but it's just like, it's too much of a task, and then you do it. So what we've tried to do and what we've done at our properties, just on a resiliency, sustainability basis, is we try to make it about people, and we try to put it in a storytelling component. So here are the examples. So we took the former Unocal Oil corporate headquarters and transformed it into an entertainment complex where major TV shows and movies are filmed. One of the things that bothered me is Woody Harrelson was hanging off the Golden Gate Bridge protesting the demolish of the redwood forest. Meanwhile, I'm down at the studio, and contrary to what most people would think, the movie studio most of the time is a construction site. It's literally like a single family development where they're building sets and destroying sets constantly. Yeah. They only film about 10, 15% of the time. So I'm seeing all these sets just go into these landfills. So we ultimately created a competition between the TV show Numbers and Mad Men. And I'm proud to say now, it is now standard fare in the movie industry, in the television industry, to recycle sets. And it was just a question of one person. A second example would be is we really focused on fossil fuels and water, and we cut our consumption over 5 years more than 40% in both areas. But then what we did is, rather than go for LEED certification, we started storytelling with storytelling boards, the same way when a movie shot or a TV show shot, there's a storyboard. Well, we created storyboards all over the campus, and the different tenants started sharing their best practices and competing with each other how to do things better, which enabled us to have that change. So there's one example. Another example would be is we did a 900,000 square foot build-a-suit in Miami of a new state-of-the-art, probably the most state-of-the-art air cargo facility in North America. Well, we were really fixated on that because it took a tenant with 14 spaces within anywhere from a half a mile to 5 miles away, consolidated them into one spot on tarmac at the airport. That cut down over 24,000 truck trips a year. 80% of road maintenance, forget air quality, is tied to trucks. Yeah. So those are two examples, and then we try to use storyboards to change people's behavior, not only when they're at work, but then to try to get them to systematically think differently when they go home. Yeah. For us to really win, we really need to change human behavior, and I think you need to do it in a fun, understandable way.
That's fantastic. So you've been a very successful entrepreneur, and a lot of times you hear that sometimes, things don't happen unless you make them happen as an entrepreneur. But then, that can be overwhelming, and sort of finding, where's that separation in your life between work and your personal life. And I think it's a different balance. I think I heard Richard Branson say once that I don't know the difference between work and my personal life. It's all just living. So how have you navigated that as an entrepreneur?
So one of the lessons I learned at a council meeting at ULI, Roz Payne came in and she shared this story of this power couple of Roz and Lyle Payne. And one of the great lessons I took away from it is she said, lay over your business and career plan with your personal plan. Right. And do it as a couple, not just as an individual. And I've learned through time, I wish I had learned the lesson sooner, but you can avoid a lot of the carnage on the highway of life by laying those elements out, identifying the conflicts, and avoiding blow-ups as a result. And people talk about communication, but I don't think they do a great job visualizing and then prioritizing and then making choices. So, and I think it's applicable. I know it's applicable, and I know it's why we've been really successful as a partnership, both on a personal and on a business basis. For me personally, is following Roz's advice. Yeah. If I could impart one piece of advice out of this whole video, I think that's the most important piece in hindsight.
So having a clear vision and plan that you've collectively bought into, and understand what the impact is on your personal life.
So the one thing I would add to that, which we didn't talk about, lessons learned at the beginning, is having a vision is really important because it gives you an idea of a roadmap where you're headed. And if you get thrown off the roadmap, it's okay to get thrown off the roadmap, but then you've got a sense, what do I have to do to get back? So when we talked about the workouts, when I made that mistake, right, I got thrown off my roadmap. But we, as a partnership, ultimately got back to where I originally visualized where we wanted to head. And it was a positive, but if we didn't have a vision, we never would have gotten back to where we would have gotten. And I think that's important for personal relationships too. Life throws you curveballs in all different kinds of ways, and as a couple, unless you're able to tell, here's where we want to go, and also, hey, we got thrown off here, we got to deal with this, but then how are we going to get back on? I think it's critical in all parts of your life.
Great. That's great advice. So mentorship, when you think back on your career, who are those people that had a big impact on your career and helped you through navigate a lot of things? Are there people that stand out?
Well, first, my father, without a doubt.
Right.
Second would be ULI, with Charlie Shaw was first. And when I first got into leadership, he took me aside and he really shared with me and got me to think differently about not just making money or running a great project, but that we had a responsibility to think more about building environments instead of buildings. And then Jim Klingbeil, even to this day, is an incredible mentor and has been for 20 years. And I think people, even young people, need to understand you need mentors your whole life. Don't look at like mentorship is just when you're younger. Right. There's people that you have trust in, and they have trust in you, that it's a really wonderful experience. And then from an aspirational viewpoint, rather than a mentor viewpoint, I would say Harry Frampton, because he took a different tangent than Charlie did, where he talked about it's really important that real estate's about people. It's, you know, buildings are a byproduct, but the before and after and during, it's about people. And that's why, on a philanthropic viewpoint, why I believe every single person in the land use process, even if you're starting out in the business, has the real ability to make a visible difference and to make it matter, because they're part of that process. And if they push for the right choices, each one of them has the ability to change the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when you talk to folks, I think sometimes they struggle with seeking out mentors. ULI is a great place to do that, has been in your career. But also I think people struggle with the idea that they themselves can be a mentor to somebody else. And you've been mentors to many people. So talk about sort of how that role reverses sometimes, and how you become a mentor and how you provide that mentorship to people.
Well, first off, I think that you need to look at it that you can learn probably a lot more from them than they're going to learn from you.
Right.
And you can share some things with them, but at the same time, the most important component is to listen and reflect. I think those are in hindsight, two of the most important things, whether it's leadership or mentorship, is listening and then being Socratic.
Right.
Allow people to figure out and help them figure out, because they're in the best position to make their own decisions, and they've got the most information. So the goal is to share your experiences, share where you've made mistakes that they can then put into their, into their brain to be able to figure out, okay, how can I avoid doing that without doing it?
Right.
And I think those are the important lessons. The other part is I think people think that they should have one mentor, and one of the things I'm sharing here is I think you should have multiple mentors, and you should look at, don't think you only need mentors when you're young.
Right. No, I think that's right. So I'm guessing that your introduction to ULI came from Jim Graskamp, the legendary real estate professor at the University of Wisconsin, probably the father of teaching about real estate. You've mentioned ULI a lot of times, but already. But talk about the importance that ULI has played in your career and what it can do for others.
Values endure, principles endure, people endure. ULI and ULI members are going to endure because ULI has always stood for making a visible difference and changing the world. So as Graskamp used to say, the questions will probably pretty much be the same, but the answers are always going to be different. And my experience with ULI has really proved that out. What Jim Graskamp was an idealist. He wanted each student to have the creativity of Leonardo da Vinci. He wanted them to have the sense for the environment of John Muir, who's a Wisconsin grad, and he wanted the political humanity and the cash flow enterprise management skills of James Rouse. Now, no student was ever going to be able to achieve those ideals, but he wanted to set you on a journey where you were constantly pushing yourselves. Without ULI and the ULI members, that's where being able to pursue those ideals has been made possible. And ULI is a university without walls, and it's been an invaluable contribution to who I am, what I am, and large part what I've been able to do. And I'll be eternally grateful for it.
So you've been incredible in giving back to your communities, many organizations, ULI, University of Wisconsin. Talk about the importance of giving back. And I think somewhat similar to mentorship, people think that's something you're going to do down the road, right? But talk about how, your thoughts about giving back, and then guidance to others about, why it's important and when you should start.
Well, I'm going to quote Ted Turner. And Ted Turner had the greatest line of all. He says, you don't need any money to be a philanthropist. You just need time and the willingness to make a difference. So philanthropy is about time, it's about networks, and it's about treasure. But what it's really about is leveraging human capital. And what we really proved over the last couple years with the foundation, especially ULI, our greatest gift as an organization is the human capital that we can bring to deal with different problems or issues facing society moving forward. I would encourage or challenge the Young Leaders Group that they should pick a project every year that the group coalesces around and deploys their human capital, and then with their annual fund contributions, have them leveraged even further by the foundation to go out and be the difference.
Right.
And I think that that's very achievable, and I think that they're prepared, and I think it also provides ownership and a sense of purpose for the Young Leaders Group. Pope Francis recently has made a comment that what he'd really like to see is the institutions create a physical monument every year to dealing with different social issues. I don't think ULI needs to build any more physical monuments, but I think that it's human capital to be deployed relative to this massive shift from 50% to 2/3 of the world being urbanized is going to provide tremendous opportunity for the young leaders. And the sooner they get involved, the sooner they get the opportunity to make a difference,
right,
the more fulfilled they will feel not only with their involvement with ULI, but also with their own firms in terms of how they start looking at every project they do. They understand every choice makes a difference.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So as we wrap up, I have to ask, there are the legends, Prince, Sting, Madonna, Beyonce. So those of you, those of our viewers that don't know you, you're widely known as Curtis. So when did you reach rock star status and just became known as Curtis?
Well, I was hardly a rock star. It was in high school, and it stuck. And then when I went to college without even sharing it, it stuck there.
Yeah.
And so there's no big rock star story, unfortunately.
No? Well, you're a rock star in our minds. Thank you so much for sharing all your time and talent and experience, and for future generations of ULI leaders. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
You bet.